Welcome to my analysis of round 3 of this exciting 2018 World Chess Championships. And in this game, we had the challenger, Fabiano Caruana, with the advantage of the white pieces, playing against the reigning champion, Magnus Carlsen. So the game started as it did in round 1 with the Sicilian. Woohoo! I'm very happy to see this move. Actually, the most common move against e4 if you look at the stats, but also reputation of being the most interesting move, often leading to very exciting and open, aggressive, attacking games. Now, Fabiano played knight to f3, and after knight c6, it remains a mystery as to what Carlsen would do against the open Sicilian with d4. I really hope we find out, because this move leading to open attacking positions is clearly one of the most aggressive and interesting openings in chess. I expect Magnus will play the Shrezhnikov, as I discussed in my first video on this. But Fabiano stick to his guns, and he played bishop to b5, the so-called Rosalimo variation of the Sicilian. g6 now played. Magnus continues to play as he did in game 1, which he got a very good position. A capture on c6, and now the move that most top players tend to play, taking away from the centre, breaking some rules, but increasing control of the d-file and allowing the bishop now to develop. d3 played, bishop g7, very nice piece, controlling the centre. White now castles. In round 1, Fabiano played h3, stopping bishop g4. But he basically decides that this move is not needed, and of course, if you can avoid wasting time, then you probably should do. And that's why he castled straight away. So we're kind of in new territory now. And here Magnus played a very rare and I would even say rather peculiar move, queen to c7. And we can see that Magnus is trying to pick ideas which make Fabiano think from a very early stage. I mean, Fabiano and Magnus are going to be very well prepared for this match. So I think Magnus's idea, we can see, is trying to get Fabiano out of his easy, non-thinking moves which he's prepared beforehand. I have my doubts about this move, I have to be honest, because sometimes the queen wants to come to e7 in this variation where it defends the pawn here, and as in the first game, even d6. I'm not sure if the queen should really commit so far. And Fabiano, after a reasonably long think, now played rook to e1. And this is a move to basically see what black's intentions are. It leaves the possibility of playing e5, hanging in the air, and in some situations, as in the Raul Lopez, the knight on b1 can maybe come round to the f1 square. We free up that square, and later on potentially come to g3, even though this square I wouldn't say is particularly good for this knight, because where does it go next? f5 and h5 being controlled by the pawn on g6. Magnus now decides to play e5, standard move, gaining this control over the centre of the board. And here I think the next move is very logical, a3. White, rather than round 1 where Fabiano tries to play for f4, clearly this move is not as good now that the rook is on e1. Fabiano decides to play on the queen side, hopefully with the idea of b4, and after a capture on b4, the rook, which moved fantastically in straight lines, opens up. Maybe bishop e3 is, I would say, even better in some ways, because you kind of force the move b6. And now you can play with the same idea, a3. And who do these two moves help, b6 and bishop e3? Well, I would say developing the piece for white, it must be slightly advantageous, surely, for white. But anyway, the game continued after a3 with knight to f6. The knight is actually very badly placed on e7 if you develop it here. Where's it going to go in the future? You want to have when you develop your knights, you want to give them roots for the middle game. And this knight really, at some point, wants to try to head towards the centre. And here it doesn't really have anywhere it can go later on. All of its future squares are kind of covered. So knight to f6, and now Fabiano continues with b4. Very consistent plan. Magnus now played castling quickly, and I wonder if this is still in his preparation. My honest opinion of Magnus's opening here with queen c7 and castles is I find it rather suspicious, actually. I don't really like this idea. I mean, who am I to criticize Magnus? But I think he's going to have to be very careful playing like this, because you're kind of giving white this free hand on the queen side, and I'm not really sure how easy it is for black to get his counterplay. Maybe this was his preparation, and he was relying not on the move played, knight on bd2, but relying on Fabiano to take on c5. He did say in a pre-interview that one thing that Fabiano does that differs to him is grab pawns and sacrifice pawns. So maybe he was relying on this move, which I think is purely, very possibly playable, but maybe his opening idea is knight d7, trying to take this back with a knight, and after something like bishop e3, f5, trying to create counterplay with f4 on the king side. Maybe this was his risky idea. And I think Fabiano's move was very clever. He just didn't want to get involved with his preparation. Maybe if Magnus had spent another 2 minutes castling, a bit of mind games, Fabiano would have thought, well, maybe this is not preparation then. There's a lot of mental stuff going on. This is a trick I use often. If I've prepared a line in the morning against a player, I won't blitz out the moves. I will make sure I spend a significant amount of time playing the moves, even though I know exactly what I'm doing, to fool my opponent into thinking that I haven't prepared, therefore tricking him to go down the line I want him to play. I don't want him to smell a rat. Probably doesn't work at World Championships level, but you know, hey-ho. So knight bd2 played. The knight wants to come to this square, and again, this is talking about you move your knights to squares where they have future. On c3 it doesn't have a future, but on this square it wants to come to c4, where it applies pressure on this e5 pawn, and also on other squares. Maybe b3 is also an option for the knight. And now bishop g4. I think this is a smart decision. The bishop doesn't really have much of a future, and I think it's correct to get rid of one of these pieces that's attacking the central majority, even though you lose your bishop pair. h3. Bishop takes f3, and now knight takes f3. So Fabiano decides to keep some pressure here. And now Magnus decides to take on b4. A takes b4. Now, structurally speaking, chess is about two things. It's about the pawn structure and about pieces, basically. Structurally speaking, if we look at the pawn structure, I really like white's pawn structure. White has one pawn mass. All the pawns are next to each other. And this is advantageous. They can all defend each other. Black has two pawn masses because there's a break here between the pawns. And white has this very useful A-file that he can play along. So the next move, I think, is very logical. I mean, I wouldn't want to play A6 here, where it's not clear what your future plan is as black. And white can harmoniously develop and maybe try to put some pressure on these dark squares over here. So A5, aiming to simplify, is a very logical choice. White captures on a5, rook takes a5, and now this is the first key moment of the game. The next move, really quite a peculiar decision. When you have now there's an open file. An open file is a file where there's no pawns on the board. Now in chess, the less open files you have, and there's only one open file. This file here, for example, is a half open file because there's a pawn in the way. The rule is the less open files you have, the more important they become. So if you have just one open file, it's extremely important to try and gain control of that file. That will nearly always guarantee you some kind of edge. In this position, Fabiano played bishop d2. hoping for an exchange of rooks when the queen can take over the open file. And here, white should be doing very well. Controlling the open file gives you very nice play. But after bishop d2, Magnus played a very good move. He played rook on a to a8, still contesting the open file. Even though he has to come back, he doesn't want to give away this file. Now, what Fabiano could have played here, he could have taken on a5 immediately, which he mentioned to Magnus straight away after the game, and after queen takes, played bishop d2. And by playing in this manner, just switching the move around slightly, he would have gained control of this file. Queen a1 comes, queen c7, queen a1. And you gain control of this open file. Maybe the queen can come into a7, the rook can come here. This dark square bishop, very useful if you can get that dark square bishop into a hole on b6. When your opponent puts pawns on one colour squares, the light squares, often the opposite colour squares, the dark squares, become weak. So you want to try to use those squares. And this position would have given Fabiano exactly what he wants from the opening. A very stable and small advantage, risk-free. This is what you want in a World Championship match. You don't want to go all in with the possibility of any result being possible with white. You want to play for two results, a win or a draw. And he has the open file. So I find it peculiar that he played bishop d2 here. And after rook on a to a8, it's not even clear that white has an advantage. A slightly more compact pawn structure for white, but now Magnus does a Magnus. He starts to outplay white with the black pieces. Knight d7. The knight over defends this pawn, and it gives itself some possibility to come c5 to e6 and into the center. Remember, we mentioned in this opening variation the knight wants to control this square. Queen b4 now played, so trying to activate the queen. And now a very clever move, simply rook to e8, because the bishop on g7 is hitting its own pawn, so the bishop now tries to come round to a more purposeful square. Bishop c3, b5, gaining space. We have an exchange of rooks, another exchange of rooks, and you can see here white's advantage is really gone because he doesn't have control of any open file. The exchanging of the rooks actually helps black because he doesn't have to fear this A file now. Queen a7, gaining a little bit of pressure on that file. Bishop c3, and now queen a2. And here Magnus certainly gets active enough to consider even taking the advantage away from Fabiano. Fabiano doesn't like this active queen, so he decides to exchange off queens. And after the move f6, this reinforces this weak pawn. Black is able to move the bishop on g7. Black certainly has easy equality, but in actual fact, I mean, this is where Magnus really thrives. This is the kind of position which Magnus plays better than anyone in the history of chess generally. Equal position where he can slowly but surely push in the ending. And in actual fact, having, rules are there to be broken, and having two pawn masses potentially allows these pawns to come forwards and to even, hopefully for Magnus, create a passed pawn over there. Not easy to see how, but this is really a Magnus position. So both players move their king towards the center. In the ending, of course, the king wants to come. Now they start to improve their pieces. Remember where this knight wants to go? Well, the knight wants to aim for this square and maybe this square. So how do we get this knight to a better square? And at the moment, it's just getting both sides pieces to better squares. The knight comes to e6. Nice maneuvering. And what piece does Magnus now want to bring in the game? Well, the bishop on g7. So the bishop on g7 now comes round. And here, Fabiano decides to bring his knight to b3, which makes sense to fight for c5, maybe come to a5. But the thing is, this position is just a little bit harder for white to play. In chess, you want to be the side who has an easy plan. You don't want to be the side who's struggling to find a plan, and pawn breaks are very important. Now, f4 is a pawn break that white may well have, but it's quite easy for black to stop that. d4 he can't break with. On the other hand, Magnus has these two pawns. He can play for c4 or b4, and it's easier for this position for black to play. Now, the next move, knight to g5, is a really grandmasterly move. This forces the move h4, and in some ways you could say that black is creating what we call a hook. This pawn is now on a dark square. There are dark square bishops, so later on, this pawn can now be targeted by that bishop. It couldn't be before on h3. And it may look like Magnus has wasted time, but he's created this slight weakness. He might even be able to play g5 at the right moment. So very, very clever positional grandmasterly idea there. Now he fixes that pawn on a dark square, and all these pawns now are targets to the bishop. Of course, Fabiano's still very solid here. They maneuver about a little bit. Magnus starts pushing his pawns, and he uses his king. Everything going Magnus's way. And now after king c2, Magnus plays f5, which I think is logical. He's got to start using his pawns here. King d1. And I think here, this is where maybe Magnus starts to maybe drift slightly. Who am I to criticise the world champion? But things simplify very much. It's move 37. And I think Magnus wanted to cause some kind of dilemma for Fabiano around the 40th move mark. So he went for a particular plan. But I think he should have probably kept the tension here. Maybe with some idea like improving the king. Maybe even bringing the king to a6. Because then, potentially, if the knight ever moves away from b3, the black king has chances to come into white's position via a4. And this is very typical in an ending. You want to use your king, not like the opening. Don't use your king in the opening, otherwise you'll be punished. But now, after taking on e4, I mean, the more stress you take out of a position, if you're trying to win, the easier for your opponent you're making it, generally. And after c4, it's now move 39, and Magnus's idea was knight c5. And this is move 40. Fabiano now plays a great move. A lot of players would not want to swap off the knight here. Bishops tending to be better in the ending, especially when a lot of white pawns are on dark squares, which can be targeted. But he has to get rid of this piece. Otherwise, this black knight will lump itself onto a4, attacking c3, or even onto d3, pressurizing f2. And then Magnus can go into Magnus mode with ideas of then activating his king via this way and really pushing. I mean, I was wondering at the time, even here I thought king c6 might be a much better idea, just trying to bring the king. You know, if you can get that king to a4, you are really tying down white to the defense of the b3 square, because you can't allow the black king into b3, where it will cause all sorts of mischief. And you can see now that if the king can get to a4 and b3, black can play b4 himself and create a passed pawn. So I think king c6 would have been better, but I understand Magnus' decision. He wants to give Fabiano a big decision with little time left. I don't think this is the right way to play, really. I mean, you know, again, I don't want to be too critical of these guys, but, you know, you shouldn't play for the clock. He could have really tortured with something else. It becomes clear after bishop takes c5, bishop takes c5, king e2, king c6, knight to f1, that Fabiano is absolutely fine here. The knight wants to come to d5 when it will stop black from ever playing b4, and in actual fact, white may be able to play f4 in those positions and push. The king and pawn endings after knight to e3, bishop takes e3 are fine for white, because remember, white can play f4 and create a passed pawn. So now b4 is the only way to try. We have an exchange on b4. Yes, black has a passed pawn, but this pawn is not so dangerous for two reasons. Number one, the black king is a long way away. Imagine that black king was on one of these two squares we're trying to get it to. Then black would probably be winning, because the black king can support this pawn coming forwards. Reason number two, the white king is very near this pawn, so it can easily defend it, and the white knight can defend it as well. So this should be okay. And as Fabiano proves, he creates his own counterplay with f4, and the more pawns you exchange, the more nearer to a draw you get. And in this position, more pawns come off, and now we have a very nice idea here. Knight takes c4, and after pawn takes f5, you may be thinking, why is this a draw? Isn't white material down? Well, this is where you need to know your endings. Even if black wins both of these pawns, because this rook's pawn is trying to queen on a light square, it's a draw. You need to have a light square bishop. If this bishop was a light square bishop, it would be a win here. But even if you get to a pawn and a bishop up, it's always stalemate tricks. I mean, let me very quickly just show you why. For example, let's just say that black does win both of these pawns. You get to a position like this, and even though it surely looks like black must be winning, there's no way that black can win this, because if you check the king goes here, and you can see that there's a lot of stalemate threats, h2 stalemate. So that's why you need this bishop to be controlling the queening square in these situations to guarantee a win. So very interesting game. I think that sets us up nicely. I'm really hoping that Fabiano will step up to the mark when he has white in the next game, if we have the same opening. I don't know if we will. Magnus might not chance his arm again, but I really hope on move 3 Fabiano steps up and plays an open Sicilian. It's really the only way to play, and then we're going to have some real fireworks. Round 4 today, Magnus with the white pieces. I'm actually expecting a lot of violence, and I'm expecting some real chaos today. I'm going to continue doing my game reports on this. Sorry this one was a bit late. I've been quite busy with other stuff, such as life. But please do like and subscribe to my channel, and hopefully I'll see some nice comments below. I'll get around to answering the comments at some point. Bye for now. Cheers for watching this video, and I'll catch you again for my Game 4 analysis. Goodbye for now.